By the autumn of 1944, the US Navy's submarine fleet had become one of the most feared forces in the Pacific. After years of correcting defective torpedoes and refining aggressive tactics, American submariners were sinking Japanese merchant ships, troop transports, and warships at a rate that crippled Japan's wartime economy. But no submarine, and no commander, had a deadlier reputation than USS Tang SS 306 and her captain, Commander Richard "Dick" O'Kane. Tang was a Balao-class submarine, sleek, heavily armed, and built to hunt far behind Japanese lines. But what made her extraordinary wasn't her steel. It was her crew and their commander, a 33-year-old officer whose aggressive doctrine had rewritten the rules of undersea warfare. O'Kane believed that submarines were not meant to stalk targets from afar. They were meant to attack up close, right into the heart of a convoy, often at night and often on the surface. It was a style of warfare that demanded reflexes, nerve, and absolute confidence. And the results were astonishing. By mid-1944, Tang had already sunk 24 enemy ships, more than almost any submarine in the Pacific. Her attacks were fast, precise, and often suicidal in appearance. She would burst out of the darkness, fire torpedoes at point-blank range, then slip under exploding wrecks as Japanese escorts unleashed depth charges. O'Kane trained his crew to operate like a single organism. Every man knew his job, every man trusted the others with his life. Tang quickly became legendary among submariners. Sailors whispered her name on bases in Pearl Harbor and Midway. Patrol reports from Japanese captains described an American submarine that seemed to appear from nowhere, fire with perfect accuracy, and disappear back into the ocean. She was deadly, silent, and relentless, qualities that made her the most decorated US submarine of her time. But in the fall of 1944, everything changed. O'Kane received orders for Tang's 5th Combat Patrol, one designed to cut the final remaining supply arteries between Japan and the Philippine battlefields. American forces were planning the liberation of the Philippines. Japanese convoys were sailing desperately between islands, trying to reinforce their troops. The ocean lanes near Formosa, modern Taiwan, were filled with transports, tankers, and destroyers. It was a hunting ground tailor-made for Tang. The submarine departed Pearl Harbor on September 24, 1944. She carried 24 Mark 18 electric torpedoes and 12 steam-powered Mark 14 torpedoes, enough firepower to devastate multiple convoys. Even before reaching her designated patrol area, Tang attacked a Japanese ship within hours, sinking it with a single spread and slipping away before escorts could react. It was the opening act of what would become the most successful submarine patrol in US Navy history. As days passed, Tang sliced through Japanese shipping with ruthless precision. In a single week, she sank multiple freighters, transports, and coastal defense ships. O'Kane's tactics grew even more daring. He attacked convoys at point-blank range, sometimes within 700 yards, where torpedoes had no time to miss. He surfaced at night so Tang could maneuver at full speed, turning her from a submarine into a surface raider. Japanese sailors feared this phantom attacker they called the Black Ghost. By late October, Tang had sunk so many ships that even O'Kane's crew struggled to keep count. The submarine had become a one-boat blockade, halting Japan's flow of reinforcements as American forces closed in. In all of World War II, no submarine had ever sunk more tonnage in a single patrol. But the greatest moment, and the deadliest, was still ahead. On the night of October 24th to 25th, 1944, Tang detected a massive Japanese convoy sailing through the Formosa Strait. It was the perfect target. Transports packed with troops, escorts scattered, cargo ships crawling toward the Philippines. As Tang moved toward the convoy, O'Kane prepared for his boldest attack of the war. What he didn't know, what no one could know, was that within hours, USS Tang's legendary patrol would end in one of the most shocking accidents in naval history. A torpedo fired by Tang would come back to kill her. Shortly before midnight on October 24, 1944, the sea around the Formosa Strait was ink black, broken only by faint reflections of starlight on the waves. USS Tang was running on the surface, O'Kane's preferred attack posture, its powerful diesel engines propelling the submarine at high speed as it closed in on the Japanese convoy. Radar operators tracked multiple targets. Large transports, tankers, and several escort ships fanned out in loose formation. It was exactly the kind of chaos O'Kane thrived in. The first attack began just after 2300 hours. Tang slipped through the outer ring of escorts and moved directly toward a cluster of transports. The crew worked like clockwork. Torpedo tubes flooded, bearings checked, ranges called out in whispers. At point-blank distance, O'Kane gave the order. Fire! 2 Mark 18 torpedoes shot from the forward tubes, invisible beneath the water. No wake, no flash. Seconds later, a massive explosion tore through the nearest transport. Flames erupted from the ship as it listed sharply to port. Before Japanese escorts could react, O'Kane swung Tang around and launched a second spread. Another transport was hit. Men on its decks scrambled toward lifeboats, only to be swallowed by fire and smoke. The escorts panicked. Some rushed toward the burning ships, others fired depth charges blindly, unsure where the attack was coming from. O'Kane used the confusion perfectly, ducking behind the burning wrecks to mask Tang's silhouette. But he wasn't finished. Repositioning at incredible speed, Tang cut across the convoy's path and prepared a second strike, this time at a troop ship packed with hundreds of Japanese soldiers. The range was absurdly close, less than 900 yards. At that distance, even small errors were deadly. Fire 3! Fire 4! The torpedoes leapt from the tubes. Both slammed into the target almost simultaneously. The ship shuddered, broke in two, and began sinking almost immediately. Survivors in the water could barely comprehend what had happened. They had been attacked so fast and so close that many believed Tang was a Japanese vessel gone rogue. By 1 o'clock, Tang had already sunk 3 ships. But O'Kane pressed his attack deeper into the convoy, weaving between burning hulks and manoeuvring towards the final column of surviving transports. Japanese escorts scrambled in every direction, their searchlights slicing the darkness. Machine gun fire sparked across the water. But Tang was too fast, too close, and too unpredictable. Then came O'Kane's boldest moment. He positioned Tang for a third attack run at just 800 yards, a suicidal distance. The crew was silent, tense, sweating in the confined heat of the control room. O'Kane stared through the periscope, waiting for the perfect instant. When it came, he fired 4 more torpedoes in rapid sequence. All 4 hit. All 4 detonated. In less than 2 hours, Tang had sunk more ships than most submarines did in an entire war patrol. The ocean burned with oil and debris. Lifeboats drifted through fields of wreckage. Japanese sailors shouted frantically, firing their rifles at shadows. The convoy was finished. At 2:15, O'Kane prepared for the final strike of the night. Tang's forward torpedo room was empty. Only 2 torpedoes remained, both loaded in the stern tubes. These last shots would complete what was already the most successful attack ever carried out by an American submarine. The sea was churning with burning debris. Tang moved at low speed, reversing away from the convoy to line up her final target, a crippled transport still afloat, stubbornly refusing to sink. O'Kane aimed, calculated the angle, and gave the order to fire the first of the 2 remaining torpedoes. It raced straight and true, impact, a clean kill. Then O'Kane ordered the final torpedo fired. What he didn't know was that this last weapon, the one meant to finish the job, was defective. In seconds, it would curve around, circle back, and head straight for Tang. When Tang's final torpedo left the stern tube at 2:30 a.m. on October 25, 1944, everything appeared normal. The tube crew reported a clean launch, no misfires, no mechanical jolts. The control room was tense but confident. They had done this dozens of times. O'Kane focused through the periscope, watching for the expected hit on the crippled transport drifting in the darkness. But something was wrong. Instead of the steady sound of the torpedo's engine receding into the distance, sonar operators picked up a strange echo pattern, an irregular turn, then a curve. Torpedoes sometimes ran erratically, but this sound was different. It wasn't wandering. It was coming back. At first, no one believed it. The idea was unthinkable. Torpedoes did not circle back unless they suffered catastrophic gyro failure, one of the rarest and deadliest malfunctions possible. And yet, one of the crewmen monitoring the sonar snapped his head toward O'Kane and shouted, "Sir, she's turning!" O'Kane froze for a fraction of a second. Then he reacted with lightning speed. "Back emergency! Rudder hard left!" The engines roared as Tang tried to swing away, reverse direction, anything to break the incoming torpedo's lock. Men braced against bulkheads as the submarine lurched violently. Officers shouted course corrections. The helmsman fought the controls. The diving officer tried to angle the boat downward. But it was too late. Through the periscope, O'Kane saw the flash of the torpedo's running light, a tiny white glint cutting a deadly arc across the waves. It rounded in perfect silence, accelerating toward Tang's stern. Time slowed to seconds. The torpedo struck Tang just aft of the conning tower. The explosion was catastrophic. A thunderous blast tore through the hull, ripping open compartments and throwing crewmen off their feet. Lights blew out, machinery snapped from its mountings, and tangles of metal and pipes rained down. Men were hurled against steel walls. Water poured into the after compartments at terrifying speed. Tang began to sink almost instantly. O'Kane was thrown from the periscope stand and slammed into the deck. Dazed but conscious, he heard the shouts of wounded crewmen, the alarms wailing, and the roar of seawater rushing inside. Damage reports came in frantic bursts. After engine room flooding. Control room holding, for now. Stern tubes destroyed. Electrical failure. Batteries offline. The submarine angled downward, stern first, sliding into the depths. O'Kane knew exactly what had happened. Mark 18 torpedoes, electric, weightless, deadly, were also notoriously unreliable. If the gyro mechanism failed, the torpedo could run a vast circle pattern, often returning towards the firing vessel. It was a known risk, but one that commanders accepted because of the torpedo's deadly performance against Japanese shipping. Tonight, that risk had become reality. As Tang plunged deeper, O'Kane gave the command every submariner dreaded. All hands, prepare to abandon ship. But abandoning a submarine was nearly impossible at depth. Only the forward compartments were intact. The stern compartments were already lost, flooded completely. Men trapped there had no chance. The bow stabilized briefly at around 180 feet, resting on the muddy bottom. The submarine groaned under pressure. Water seeped through cracks in the bulkheads. Only 30 men, less than half the crew, were still alive, trapped inside the dark, tilting front sections of the boat. The situation was hopeless. But then someone remembered the Momsen lung, a primitive but life-saving escape device stored in the forward torpedo room. Using them required nerves of steel. The escaping crewman had to equalize pressure, open the escape hatch, and ascend through hundreds of feet of dark water, while avoiding decompression sickness, drowning, or being crushed by pressure changes. 9 men attempted the escape. Only a few made it to the surface. They burst through the waves in the middle of the night, injured, freezing, clinging to debris, only to find Japanese sailors searching the wreckage. The survivors were captured immediately and hauled aboard a destroyer. O'Kane was among them. He had escaped through the torpedo tube. The submarine that had sunk more ships than any vessel in the Pacific had been destroyed by its own torpedo, its final shot of the war. When dawn broke over the Formosa Strait on October 25, 1944, the sea was eerily calm. Wreckage from the Japanese convoy drifted slowly across the water. Charred wood, oil slicks, lifeboats, crates, pieces of metal still warm from the night's explosions. But somewhere among the debris were the only surviving members of USS Tang, clinging to life after one of the strangest and most tragic endings in submarine history. 9 men, including Commander Richard O'Kane, had escaped the submarine through the torpedo room. Their escape was a feat few submariners ever survived, ascending from nearly 180 feet using the primitive Momsen lung, a device that recycled a diver's breath during emergency ascents. The risks were enormous: burst lungs, nitrogen poisoning, blackout from pressure changes, but the men had no other hope. When they reached the surface, exhausted and gasping, they expected rescue. Instead, they found themselves staring at the searchlights of a Japanese destroyer, one of the few escorts that had survived Tang's devastating assault. Japanese sailors hauled the survivors from the water. Some were beaten immediately. Others were too dazed or injured to resist. O'Kane, bruised, bleeding, and half-conscious from the escape, was shoved into the hold of the escort vessel. The men knew that being captured by the Japanese was almost a death sentence. But fate had one more twist left. As news spread among the Japanese that the Americans they had rescued were submarine men, officers lined up to interrogate the survivors. One could hardly believe the story that the submarine which had single-handedly annihilated their convoy had been destroyed not by depth charges, not by ramming, not by skillful defence, but by its own torpedo. The irony was surreal. Tang had sunk more enemy ships than any other US submarine patrol of the war. She had delivered one of the deadliest blows to Japanese shipping, yet her final act had turned against her, sealing her crew's fate. The survivors were taken first to Takao, Formosa, beaten, interrogated, and deprived of food. Later they were transported to Ofuna, a notorious naval interrogation center in Japan where high-value prisoners were kept in isolation. O'Kane and his men endured months of torture, starvation, and psychological abuse. Some captors showed them the wreckage of their own torpedo engine, recovered from the water as proof of Tang's bizarre demise. Despite the brutality, the survivors refused to reveal intelligence. Several were transferred to labor camps, where they barely survived the winter of 1945. Some weighed less than 90 pounds by the time the war ended. When Japan finally surrendered in August 1945, American occupation forces liberated the surviving Tang crew. O'Kane, who believed most of his men had died, broke down when he discovered that several had lived. Their testimonies restored the ship's full war record and confirmed the impossible truth of her sinking. In 1946, Commander O'Kane received the Medal of Honor for Tang's final patrol, the most successful in US submarine history. The submarine had sunk 33 enemy ships, crippling Japanese troop reinforcement routes at a critical moment of the war. Tang's actions saved countless American soldiers during the liberation of the Philippines. But the story did not end in celebration. The US Navy quietly acknowledged the flaw in the Mark 18 torpedo program. The gyroscope failures that had doomed Tang were known, but considered an acceptable risk at the time. The war had demanded aggressive action, and Tang had delivered more than any other boat. Today, the memory of USS Tang is preserved in museums, books, and naval history halls. The bravery of her crew, their daring attacks, and their impossible survival have become legend. O'Kane went on to write about his experiences, ensuring that the world would never forget the submarine that fought harder, struck deeper, and risked more than any vessel of its kind. She died on her greatest night, victorious, deadly, unstoppable. Until the very weapon she fired turned back toward her. USS Tang remains a symbol of courage, tragedy, and the unpredictable chaos of war.